He told me I was invisible to him. Those were his exact words. Not that he didn't love me anymore. Not that things had changed. He looked me in the eye over a dinner I'd spent 2 hours making and said, "You're invisible to me, Gemma. I don't even see you when you walk into a room." And then he picked up his fork and kept eating. I remember standing there with a dish towel in my hand, not crying, not yelling. Just standing there trying to figure out if that was something a person could actually say to their wife of 6 years and then continue eating pot roast. Apparently it was. His name was Owen. We met when I was 24 and he was 30, at a mutual friend's birthday thing in Austin where I knew maybe 3 people and spent most of the night near the snack table pretending to be interested in the guacamole. He came and stood next to me and said, "The guac's better than the people, I think." I laughed. That was it. That was the whole beginning of what I thought was my life. We got married when I was 26. Small wedding, backyard at his parents' house in Ploufragueville, fairy lights and wildflowers and a playlist we made together. My sister did my hair. His mom cried. It felt like the realest thing I had ever done. For a while it was good. Not movie good, but real good. We had a house in a suburb outside Austin, nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms, a yard that needed work, a kitchen with bad lighting that I kept meaning to fix. I worked as an interior design consultant, mostly residential clients, mostly people who wanted their living rooms to look like a Pinterest board but didn't know how to start. Owen worked in commercial real estate. We had a routine: Sunday grocery runs, Thursday date nights, a shared Hulu password, and opinions about whether the shows we watched were actually good or just comfortable. I can't tell you the exact moment things shifted. I know people always want that. The one scene, the one day, the clear before and after. It wasn't like that. It was slower. It was more like the way a room gets cold when someone leaves a window cracked in winter. You don't notice it happening. You just eventually realize you're shivering and you don't know how long you've been cold. He started going to the gym more. That sounds like nothing, I know. But this was a man who had for 6 years treated the gym like a place that existed for other people. Suddenly he was going 4 times a week, coming home with wet hair from the showers there instead of using ours. New clothes started appearing. Not a lot, but enough. A new cologne I didn't recognize. He started keeping his phone face down on tables, which I told myself was a privacy thing, a habit thing, nothing. I told myself a lot of things. The distance crept in everywhere. He stopped reaching for my hand when we walked somewhere. He stopped asking about my clients, my days, the small frustrations and small wins that make up a regular life. We'd sit on the couch after dinner, and he'd be on his phone, and I'd be watching something, and we'd go to bed. And it would be so quiet. And I kept thinking, this is just what marriage looks like after a few years, right? This is normal. This is what everyone goes through and doesn't talk about at parties. I brought it up once. Actually sat him down and said I felt disconnected, that I missed him, that I wanted us to try harder. He looked at me with this expression I can only describe as tired. Not tired of the conversation. Tired of me, and said, "I hear you, Gemma," and then went back to his phone. I replayed that conversation in my head for weeks, trying to find something I'd missed, some sign that he was still in it. There was nothing there. The night of the invisible comment, about 8 months after the gym thing started, I didn't cry until I was in the bathroom with the door locked and the fan on. I sat on the edge of the tub and thought about every small thing I'd ignored and felt the full weight of all of it at once. I was 29 years old and I had somehow ended up invisible. I want to be honest about what happened next because it's not what I'm proud of. I tried so hard it makes me a little sick to think about now. I made appointments at the salon. I bought clothes that weren't my style because I thought maybe my style was the problem. I learned new recipes from YouTube channels he might like. I planned a weekend trip to Fredericksburg, bed and breakfast, wine country, the whole thing. And he came, but he spent half of Saturday afternoon on his phone in the garden, while I sat inside reading a magazine, pretending I wasn't keeping track of how long he'd been gone. On the drive home, I asked if he'd had a good time. He said, "It was fine." I nodded and watched the hill country go by and thought, this is not my life. This cannot be what I chose. 2 weeks later, I found out about her. I wasn't snooping. I want to be clear about that, not because it matters legally or even morally, but because I know how these things sound, and I want you to understand I wasn't the kind of woman crawling through her husband's phone. I picked up his phone because mine was dead, and I needed to check the time for a reservation I'd made at a restaurant for his birthday. That's it. That's the whole reason. There was a text on the screen. Just a preview. Just enough. Missing you already. Last night was... That's where it cut off. I put the phone back face down exactly where I'd found it. I went to the bathroom. I ran cold water over my wrists, the way my mom taught me to do when I was overwhelmed as a kid. I stood there for a long time. I did not confront him. Not that night. Not that week. Every instinct I had was screaming to walk out of that bathroom and throw something, to demand answers, to make a scene large enough to match what I was feeling. I didn't. I don't know exactly why. Maybe because I already knew the answer. Maybe because I needed time to think about what I was actually going to do about it. I called my older sister the next morning when Owen was at work. She lives in Denver, we talk every Sunday, and I trust her more than I trust most things in this world. I told her everything, the distance, the gym, the phone, the text preview. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Jem, you know what you have to do." I did know. I'd known for a while. I just needed to hear it from someone who loved me. I called a family law attorney that afternoon. Her name was Catherine. She came recommended through a colleague of mine, and she was the kind of person who made you feel like things were going to be okay, not because she said so, but because she was so clearly prepared for them not to be and handled it anyway. She walked me through everything. Texas is a community property state, which meant assets acquired during the marriage were generally split equally. But how that actually played out depended on a lot of factors. We had a joint savings account, a mortgage, a car each. I had my own clients, my own LLC for the design business, which I'd kept separate from the beginning mostly out of habit. That habit turned out to matter. Catherine told me not to tip my hand. Don't change behavior. Don't make any large financial moves yet. Don't mention the divorce. Just live normally. Document quietly and let her work. I want to tell you I was perfectly strategic and calm for the next 3 weeks. I was not. I cried in my car every morning before going into client meetings. I lost 4 pounds. I didn't need to lose because I couldn't eat without feeling like my stomach was full of concrete. I lay awake at 2 a.m., cataloging every moment of the last year and trying to find the place where I could have done something different, even though I already knew, I know, that this wasn't about anything I did or didn't do. But here is what I also did. I opened a personal checking account at a different bank. I photographed every financial document I could find, account statements, the mortgage, his business records that were in our shared filing cabinet. I wrote down dates, times, behavioral changes. I started keeping records of deposits and withdrawals from our joint account. I was meticulous. I was terrified. I kept going. On a Tuesday evening, Owen came home at 9:30 when he told me he had a client dinner. He smelled like someone else's perfume. He went straight to the shower without saying more than 4 words to me, and something in me just settled, not hardened. Settled. Like a decision that had been hovering finally landed. I texted Catherine, "I'm ready." She had the paperwork drawn up within the week. The morning I handed him the divorce petition, he was eating cereal at the kitchen counter before work, scrolling through something on his phone. I put the envelope next to his bowl. He looked at it, looked at me. Something crossed his face that I hadn't seen in probably 2 years. Something real. Surprise, maybe. Or the particular panic of someone who assumed they were safe and suddenly isn't. "Gemma," he said. "You should read it," I said, "and you should probably call a lawyer today." I picked up my bag and my coffee and I left for a client consultation. I sat through 2 hours of fabric swatches and lighting discussions and I was completely professional, And the whole time there was this strange, bright clarity humming underneath everything I did. Like a frequency I'd forgotten I could hear. He called 6 times before noon. I let them all go to voicemail. The weeks that followed were hard in ways I hadn't expected, and easier in ways I hadn't expected either. Owen cycled through reactions. Anger first, then bargaining, then something that looked like genuine grief, though by then I had a difficult time trusting that what I saw on his face was real. He called my sister, which was a mistake. She told him she had nothing to say to him and hung up. He asked if we could go to couples counseling. I told him we could have gone to couples counseling 18 months ago, and I would have been grateful. Now we were going to go through this process with our attorneys and divide our shared life as fairly as possible and then both be free to make better choices. He didn't like that answer. His attorney was aggressive in the early stages, pushing on the business, my design LLC, the clients I'd built over 4 years, the income I'd grown independently. Catherine handled it without blinking, because I'd kept the business separate, maintained my own books, never mingled those funds with our joint account in any meaningful way. It was clearly my separate property. Owen ended up with his share of the equity in the house, his retirement account, his car. I kept my business, my savings, my half of the equity. Given what the Austin market had done to home values in the previous 4 years, that equity was not nothing. We closed on the sale of the house in early spring. I stood in the empty living room the day of closing and looked at the bad kitchen lighting I'd never fixed and felt, I want to be careful about this word, I felt released. I found an apartment in the South Congress neighborhood, 2nd floor, big windows, a small balcony where I could put plants. It was the first space that was entirely mine. I painted one wall in the bedroom a deep terracotta, because I had always wanted to, and Owen thought bold wall colors were a bad investment. I bought a couch in a color I loved. I hung art that was strange and personal and didn't match in a way that was fully intentional. I went back to the gym, not because I was trying to become someone new, but because it turned out I had a lot of feelings that needed somewhere to go, and running on a treadmill while listening to angry music was a surprisingly effective place to put them. My business grew. I think partly because I was working harder than I ever had, and partly because all the energy I'd been quietly bleeding into a marriage that didn't want me back was suddenly available for other things. I took on 3 new clients in 2 months. I hired a part-time project coordinator named Audra, who had better organizational instincts than I did and made everything run smoother. I submitted a project to a regional design competition, a complete renovation of a family's craftsman bungalow in Baldwin Creek, and it was selected as a finalist. I flew to Dallas for the ceremony and stood in a room full of people who were excited about the same things I was excited about and thought, this is what it feels like to take up space. I heard through mutual friends about 4 months after the divorce was finalized that she had ended things with Owen. I won't pretend I felt nothing when I heard that. I did feel something. Not satisfaction exactly, more like a recognition. Of course she did. The thing she'd wanted was access to someone unavailable. Once he was available, the whole arrangement lost its appeal. That's not a unique story, it's just usually not the one people lead with. Owen texted me once, about 6 months after everything was done. Just my name then. I think about how badly I handled things. I'm sorry. I read it twice. I thought about the pot roast and the invisible comment and the Fredericksburg trip and the 5 years of slow withdrawal that came before all of it. I thought about the terracotta wall and the new couch and Audra and the finalist certificate and the plants on my balcony that were, against all expectations, thriving. I didn't respond. Not because I was still angry. I was mostly past angry by then, but because there was nothing I needed from that conversation. An apology from Owen was not something that could give me back what I'd lost, and it wasn't something I needed to move forward. I had already moved forward. I'd been moving forward since the morning I put that envelope next to his cereal bowl. I want to say something to anyone who's reading this or listening to this and recognizing themselves somewhere in the early parts of what I've described. The part where you're making yourself smaller, changing your clothes, planning weekend trips, trying to become the version of yourself that will finally make the person you love see you again. That version doesn't exist. Not because you're not enough. Because the problem was never you, and no amount of becoming will fix something that was broken in someone else long before you got there. The hardest thing I've ever done was hand over that envelope. Not because I was still in love with Owen. I think I had already quietly grieved that loss over the previous year, while it was still technically a marriage. The hard part was admitting that I deserved more than invisible. That I had always deserved more than invisible. I'm 31 now. I live in my apartment with the terracotta wall and the thriving plants and a business that made 30% more revenue this year than it did the year I left. My sister came to visit in the fall and we sat on the balcony with wine and watched the South Congress foot traffic below, and she said, "You look like yourself." I didn't know how much I'd needed to hear that until she said it. You know what the strange thing is? Owen was right about one thing. I am invisible to him, but I am so completely, entirely visible to myself now that it doesn't cost me anything at all. I've thought a lot about why things went the way they did, not just with Owen, but with me. Why I stayed quiet so long. Why I kept adjusting myself like I was the one who needed fixing. And I think the honest answer is that I confused endurance with loyalty. I thought staying, trying, shrinking myself into whatever shape might finally work. I thought that was what love required. It doesn't. That's not love. That's just fear, with better lighting. Owen made choices, real, deliberate choices, repeated over time. And every choice carried weight whether he acknowledged it or not. The coldness he chose, the lies he chose, the way he looked at me across that dinner table and decided the cruelest thing he could say was also the truest, and said it anyway. None of that happened to him. He did it. And the life he ended up with, alone, apologizing over text to a woman who no longer needed to hear it. That wasn't punishment handed down from somewhere. That was just the natural result of who he decided to be. I think about that sometimes when people ask me if I'm bitter. I'm not. Bitterness would mean I'm still waiting for something from him. I'm not waiting for anything. What I am is careful now, in a way I wasn't before. Careful about what I accept. Careful about the difference between someone who is going through something hard and someone who is using hardness as a reason to treat you badly. Those are not the same thing, and I spent years confusing them. The intelligence I wish I'd had earlier wasn't about catching Owen or outsmarting anyone in a courtroom. It was simpler than that. It was the willingness to look at what was actually in front of me, instead of what I wanted to be there. When someone shows you who they are, in small ways, in the accumulation of small ways, that is information, you are allowed to use it. You are not required to explain it away or find a kinder interpretation just to keep the peace. The hardest thing about rebuilding after something like this isn't the practical parts. Catherine was good at her job. The finances sorted out. The apartment became home faster than I expected. The hard part is the internal work of deciding again and again that you are worth more than what someone else was willing to give you. That decision doesn't happen once. You make it every morning for a while, and then one morning you realize you haven't had to make it consciously because it's just become the way you see yourself. My business grew because I showed up. That's the unglamorous truth of it. I showed up when I was sad, when I was angry, when I was so tired I didn't think I had anything left. I showed up for my clients, for Audra, for the work itself, and the work gave back, not because the universe was rewarding me, just because effort, sustained over time, compounds. That's all. That's the whole secret. If I could say one thing to the version of myself, standing in that bathroom, running cold water over her wrists, it would be this. The life you are about to build is better than the one you are afraid to lose. Not easier, not painless, but so much more yours. And being yours, being fully, completely, visibly yours turns out to be the only thing that was ever worth having.